Hello, hello. I wanted to do a quick walkthrough on a mix that I recently did. It's for a Eddie Kramer competition with Soundscape for the Good Love track by Statesboro Revue. And I just wanted to show the full project and talk about the approaches I took, some of the things I learned along the way, and why I did that because I thought it would be fun to share. So let's go ahead and show you the original song here. It's got this beautiful, warm country rock mix tone that already sounds great. Cool, so that'll just give you the overall vibe of it. I feel like I'm about to go out on 6th Street and, the weather's summertime and it just feels really nice and beautiful and warm. So I typically mix metal songs and usually I have to be a lot more cutthroat with stripping out frequencies that don't need to be there and trying to really make sure it's really clear. There's a lot more tracks typically, more post-production, a lot of chaotic kind of sounds going on, so that's usually the style that I'll mix, but I really wanted to challenge myself and mix this one and try to do it a little bit unique in my taste, but keep the same vibe of it feeling the way that it feels and like the punch and the overall kind of feeling that you get when you're listening to it without totally like stripping that away. So that's the approach that I took. Let's go ahead and show you the mix that I have, and I'm going to do that by toggling the adapter metric AB plugin. So the orange is their mix and then the blue is mine. So let's play it from the beginning and then I'll just show you the difference. Cool, so that'll give you a little bit of the result of it. So as we're talking about it, you can kind of hear why that came to be. And yeah, let's start from the main channel. I basically did a top-down approach. So I first popped in all the tracks, did some coloring and grouping and just kind of organizing it. I'll briefly show you that because some of it might be interesting. So what I typically do is I'll have my main buses at the very beginning. So my first, 1 through 8 tracks that I have on my launch key or on my Ableton push, I'm able to know that those are always going to be in the same order, and I can do my volume rides and get my balancing very quickly. So the main buses I have here are the drums, bass, guitar, keys, and the vocals. And then all the individual tracks and sub buses I have with the same color. So for example, drums is blue. These are going to be all of my drum tracks. And the approach I took with that is trying to do subgroups for things that I wanted to have a single fader for. Like here you can see we have 2 kick drums, but I wanted to have 1 kick fader, so I have a kick subgroup that combines these two and does some processing just for those. And then I have another one that's kind of like a sub of that, which is the kick and the snare and the toms. That was only necessary because I wanted to kind of glue those together, but I didn't want to add really compression or anything that would affect the cymbals because that would kind of make it sound a lot more harsh and screw up the transient. So in general, what I like to do is have the main bus for things like all the drums, all the guitars, all the basses, and then subgroups that kind of combine things that I need to process separately or I want to have a separate fader for, and then the individual tracks themselves like this. And with a top-down approach, I'll start with the main bus, go down to the next level one, like the drums or the guitars. I usually mix them all while everything's playing. Sometimes I'll solo the group or the thing if I'm really trying to do something specific, but that's pretty rare. And then as it is, from there, I'll kind of go a little bit deeper if I need to and get the fine-tuned parts. So showing you what tracks we have. We have the 2 kicks, some toms, 2 snares, hats, stereo tambourines, overheads, and rooms. And we have a single bass track. And I did something different than normal. In a metal track, I might actually split the bass track into 2 and have one kind of have like a crossover frequency around 300 hertz. That would be kind of really rock solid, maybe hard limit to make sure it doesn't have too many transients, and that's really carrying the sub in the whole song. And then sometimes I'll have the other one above 300 that kind of has more of the higher mid-range, and I'll have a little bit of crunch on that with some overdrive or something. I didn't want to really do that to this song because I didn't feel like it fit, so I just kept their bass track, and I'll talk about the processing specifically there in a bit. And then here I have some guitars. We have an acoustic, 2 electrics, and 2 leads. And you can see here I have an acoustic guitar bus, even though there's only one acoustic guitar track. But having all of my tracks like in this bus form, it makes it really easy again with the faders. They're all right next to each other versus me having to remember that the acoustic is over here on the single track, and then my bus for like the electrics or for the leads are over here. And I have to remember that they're all right next to each other, so it's really easy to ride the volumes. We also have some clav, piano, and Leslie sounds. And then there's a group of vocals, so got a few backups, the main, some ooze, and then Kelly and Alice have their own tracks as well. So let's start on the main bus, and I'll talk about the approach that I took. So I added this Pro Q and this Soften, which is kind of like a beater version of Soothe. Towards the end, they just did like a really subtle cut on some of the harsh frequencies that I was noticing, so you can barely even really notice it. It's mostly when the vocals come in. Just gave a little bit more clarity around that part. It's kind of like in that de-essing kind of realm, but it isn't that noticeable, and I added this more as a corrective thing at the very end. Soften, it kind of works like Soothe, where it does the same thing and it tries to tame harsh frequencies. It's not making a huge difference, but it does have a little bit more clarity in terms of this like boxy to the fatiguing range, which to them I believe is about maybe like 500 up to maybe 6K, maybe 4K, something like that, where like those frequencies that really bug you. And you can see it's just kind of pushing them down just a little bit. Again, very subtle, but these little tiny tweaks add up to a lot in my opinion, and I really don't want the plugin to sound so noticeable right away. Usually whenever I'm working with them, I'll crank it up and then start to see, okay, well that's the max how it feels, and then I'll wind it down until it's fitting in the song. But these, they actually just didn't really need to be cranked ever. And yeah, then I put this Pool Tech, which is really nice. I made it as a rack, and the reason for that is that I have all of the controls for the high and low cut Pool Tech, the mid range, and the EQP, which is the really common one. But because they're using these faders, I don't even really know what frequencies they're doing or how much the gain is. So it's really just like a tactile way to manipulate the frequencies without having to like use your eyes and know, let me look for 30 frequency or 30 hertz or something like that. So just to kind of show you stacking, so this is the high and low cut. And here you see it's at 0, which is off, but if I were to turn it up, it says 37 here, but that corresponds to 100 hertz. So it's really nice because I'm using it as I'm mixing, which I'll show you here. And I literally don't see this whenever I'm doing it, so I'm only using my ears. That's obviously like totally chopped. So that's been a really fun way to mix high-level sweeping changes for me without being too visual. When you see a frequency and you try to tame it or boost it or cut it, just because it looks like you need to, even though you don't. So really helps me stay focused on using my ears there. I have a clipper here, and I'll show you this a little bit because it's kind of interesting. So I made a rack in Ableton for this too, and it basically lets me use the JST clip in a way that's already gain staged, and it's not going to affect the levels at all. So it goes up to 12 dB of clipping, and it has up to 12 dB of trimming. So you can, turn it up 6 and then turn it down 6, and then you'll have the same level. And it also has this 2x, which will make this go up to 24 decibels, but the trim is still fixed at 12. And what I did was basically make this rack so as you turn up the threshold, it's going to use the chain here to move it between two different groups. The first group is between 0 to 12, and all that this does is, if I show this, you see it basically reduces the trim the same amount as the drive, which is how much clipping you're doing. So as I turn it up, it's going to turn this down. That keeps the gain staging up to 12 cool. But then if I wanted to do extra, this keeps it from 12 to 24, and I have a utility here that will give the extra down. So it's doing the 3.7 but times 2, so it's actually 3.7 louder than it was. So this is reducing it by that amount. So I can go all the way up to 24 decibels of clipping, and the volume stays the same. So I can not hear it be louder and think it sounds better just because it's louder. I can actually hear when it starts to sound distorted and then back it off. So I'll show you kind of how that works here. Obviously clipping, gross. And then what I'll typically do is I'll turn it up to hear when it sounds gross, and then I'll back it off until I can't hear it at all. And that just makes sure that it doesn't go past that clipping level, and it also doesn't limit it like a compressor where you can hear it kind of getting pushed down. It just cuts off the peaks. So that helps me gain stage better and make sure that I'm not going to clip digitally in the DAW, and it helps the plugins after the fact have a little bit more consistency because it's not so high up and down, it's kind of more tame. So typically in my flow I will do some gain staging, which I'll show on like the more bus individual track kind of level, and then I'll do a quick clipper, quick high level, kind of like a pull tech or something like that, to get like these sweeping broad stroke EQs. And then at that point it already sounds pretty balanced and good, and then I can add cool effects or some microscopic processing, but at that point it's already 80% there. So let me toggle all this off. This is something I don't love to use because I don't really like mixing in headphones. I realize when I do, it has a lot more high end typically. It might just be the model that I have or whatever, but this was kind of a cool pattern. There's a repository on GitHub that has a bunch of impulse responses for different popular headphone brands. So I have the Audio-Technica R50X, and you can download that, put it into an Ableton convolution reverb, turn off all of the processing like the attack and the EQ and all of that, and it will basically try to flatten the frequency response of your headphones. So for example, mine are typically more bright, so putting this convolution reverb IR on there will actually make it a little bit warmer, so it tries to make it sound more flat. It works pretty good, but I realize if I'm using it, that means I'm using headphones, and I'm probably not going to have as good of a mix. So, if you're a headphone mixer, I highly recommend this. I'll put the link in the description to that repository if you want to do it, and it has instructions. And this is something that really helps me balance things or help with masking. So all it is a bunch of little all pass filters. So let me toggle open. So I have some EQ8s. When I have the low selected, it's just going up to maybe 200, 300. Low mid, it's going from like 80 to 500-ish maybe. The mid is going from 100 to about 3K maybe, and so forth, right? And what this allows me to do is I can isolate these different bands and see that I can still hear all of the instruments. And I also make it mono, which sucks because when you pan things and you have all the frequencies at your disposal, you can hear fun, like nice tambourines and stuff, and it's very distracting. But if I'm only trying to see that the piano and the guitars are clashing, I can really isolate it and be microscopic for just a second, and then know that even on the crappiest phone speaker, I can at least hear everything clearly. So let me show you how that sounds. So I'll typically honestly do the mid or the high mid. I very rarely use the low or the highs. They're just a little bit too drastic for me. But I feel like the mid and high mid, they'll translate to any speaker. So a phone with zero bass, if it sounds good on the mid and high mid, you can at least hear the kick, you can hear the bass, guitar, whatever. It's going to at least translate to there. So let me play a little bit using the mid and the high mid. So if you pay attention, you can hear there's a clav, pianos, an acoustic, electrics, backing vocals, and the main vocals. And then of course the drums. Those are all shining through right now. So try to pay attention to all of those like 10 different things going on. Now some of them are a little bit more on the high mid, like the acoustic guitar and maybe the hi-hat. So I'm going to put the high mid one on, and you'll hear those now. And then what I also really like about this is, okay, so I do that really quick to make sure the balance is correct and there's no crazy masking. And then when I turn it off, it just sounds so much better. You got like the full stereo spectrum and then all the frequencies, so love that. And then this is just really helpful, the Metric AB plugin. It lets you compare. You can have a bunch of different reference tracks. For this one, I just wanted to make sure it's not drastically different from the original. I didn't want to lose the awesome vibe that they currently have, or that they already have. So I basically just put it in here, made sure it's close enough with the dynamics, loudness, whatever. And they have some of these band pass type things too that are nice. But to be honest, I don't use these too much. I think just overall kind of a quick vibe check. And the main thing is that you have the one button to turn back and forth, and then it volume matches. So until you're done and you're mastered, you're not going to be at the same volume as these recordings from Spotify. So it matches that, and it makes it much easier to compare and not just think that yours sounds worse because it's quiet. So that's the meat of that plugin. And then I just have a limiter here. This is doing all the work of trying to get my LUFS up a bit to make it competitive. I'm doing about 11.4 dB of gain, which a little bit more than I typically would do. I think in my other mixes, I'm usually a lot more cutthroat with frequencies, so I have more room to boost it. This one, I think at the peaks, it's kind of pushing it down like by up to 5. Go to maybe the chorus. So L2 is so good that you really can't hear it in this case, but I'm doing quite a lot of limiting, like 4.8, 5.4. So it's doing a lot of work in this case, but I really don't want to like cut things too much and lose the vibe and make it too clear. And I also don't need this probably, but I usually just for safe put a L2 that doesn't have any gain boost, and I just use this as like a brick wall limiter at the end of my master chain, just to make sure no matter what, I'm not going to be clipping at that point. So at this point, I put everything in there. I did, really high level sweeping changes, and then I'll go down bus by bus and just kind of play them together. So like the drums, I make sure these are going good first. So I'll go kind of in detail with the drums bus, and then as you'll see, I'll skim through the rest and just find more interesting parts because I do the same thing, basically, in terms of gain, staging, clipping, whatever. So the gist of what my approach is I like to have the input gain ballpark around -18 RMS, so the average. And I just use the mini meters plugin, and I realized after doing the first video, I'm actually a lot quieter on the drum bus than I normally would be. And I think it's because I used to have the individual tracks really loud. And once I gain staged them, I never went back and corrected this. So one thing you'll notice is it's not around -18. It's actually much quieter. And here, when I wanted to put a little bit of glue compression, I had to go all the way down to -40 for it to just kind of like actually hit because it's so quiet. So, at the end of it, I boost it, right, and it's fine. But it's a little bit interesting that when I was moving quick, I didn't catch that, and that's not a normal thing. So, typically I'll have it input going around -18 RMS, and that's good for a lot of the analog plugins that I wanted to use for this track. Keep that same kind of vibe like it's on a console, and they typically are optimized to work it around -18 going in. So I'll show you how this works. And you'll notice this is a VU meter, so it's not going to be fast. It's kind of just getting the ballpark range, so it's very forgiving, and it's not looking for peaks necessarily. So once I usually have that set to about what I want, I'll put another clipper here, or I'll put a clipper here, and I'll turn the threshold in the same way I did on the master chain, just where it's not audible. And again, this just kind of cuts it so that I don't lose any transients, but like audibly, but I don't have them jumping up and down so much. So when I go into my actual compression or my transient kind of shaping later, it's not jumping around as much. It's kind of tamed it a little bit, but it still has that punch. So I'll show you kind of how I'll do it here. So actually I cranked it all the way up, which is compressing or clipping it at 24, and I couldn't hear the difference, which is probably just because it's so quiet. So I could actually crank this up a little bit more, but I'll leave it for now. It's already too late. But and then I'll do the same kind of approach, just like a high sweeping. I'll throw a pull tech on there and kind of get things sounding pretty good, just to show you without it. Solo it just for kicks. This is a pretty subtle change. I have a little bit of boost and dip and cuts, but very hard to tell. I did most of the work in the kick and snare, and most of the work is really in the kick and snare. Honestly, the room and the overheads and tambourine, they already sounded excellent without pretty much any work, so I didn't have to do much. And then I have a little bit of glue compression, just kind of tickling it. So it's not super noticeable, but if you listen for it, you can tell that instead of it just kind of being like do do da do 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 da, and they're kind of doing their own thing, it kind of has a little bit more of this breathing effect where it's like do do da do 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 da, like they're kind of in sync breathing, so it just feels a little bit more glued together and in sync rather than nice sounding things going on at the same time and the same tempo. It's got that plus a little bit of like a breathing effect. So try to listen for that and see if it's useful. And you can see it's tickling it, right? It's only maybe like up to 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction at the max. So just a little bit of breathing. Overall, these tiny little changes to me add up really well. And I don't want it to feel like it's so overly compressed and it's really obvious every time I add something on. And then my last thing I do on all buses and individual tracks typically is I'll put the same kind of thing I do for going in, I'll have going out. The only difference is I have it where I'm shooting for -14 instead of -18. And then I'll make sure that it doesn't peak past like -6. That gives me plenty of headroom, but it's not super quiet. So my buses, I can do a lot of processing on it without worrying about clipping, and then it's audible. So I don't have to boost it and go past 0 on my faders. So for me, it's been working out really well like that, and it's a really simple thing. And honestly, once I'm able to get the input, clipping, general tiny EQs, and output, and then I do the faders, it's already like 80% there. So I really like this flow. It keeps me in the vibe and just enjoy the song. I'll show you the bass really quick. Or actually, okay, we're talking about the drums. So talking about a little bit about the sub buses. Let's briefly mention that. So I had 2 kicks, so you can hear they're different. Probably one is in and one's out, I'm guessing. I did have one of them be a little bit louder because it had a little more transient, so that's why you can hear that. They're kind of similar in sound, but this one just had a little bit more transient, so I chose that to win. And this one just gave it a little bit more of the, like the low end, like bottom woof kind of sound. So I basically put these both into their own. I'll keep this view, it's probably better for showing this type of thing. The kick, so I have both of them going here into the kick subgroup so that I can process them together. And all I really did was the same normal stuff that I won't cover again, but I did make this trans shaper rack, and it's really simple. It basically does kind of like what the Pool Tech does. It just combines a few plugins that I use often when I'm doing transient shaping, and I don't have to open them individually, and I can just kind of mix with my ears. Like 76 isn't 76% here, so I can not be stuck like trying to match something. I'm literally just hearing for it. So transient master, it lets you change the attack and sustain, so I'll show you how that sounds. It's really obvious. This is max attack, it's real clicky, and then I'm going to take it all the way down. So you can hear it when I don't have any attack, it's just like ooh, ooh. It doesn't even have like a da, da. So I'll put this back, I think it was around 19-ish, and then I'll do the sustain, it's the opposite. So when I turn it up, it's going to be like doo, doo, and then down it's going to be like da, da. So really, really nice. Almost 0 effort. You get the transient exactly the way that you want it. Then I just have a stock Ableton compressor. I basically just mapped the knobs, so ratio, attack, whatever, into it. I'm not doing any kind of changes. It's just a convenience thing, so they're all grouped here. I use the same clipper that I use. I do another one here because I'm changing them, like I'm adding more transients with the attacks, so I want to make sure that I don't get too crazy up and down after I do that, so I have a clipper here as well. And then the utility is just for the output. So this is a really helpful thing. I'll show you how it sounds with and without. So I didn't go too crazy. I didn't want it to feel like a clicky metal drum or anything, but I did kind of clean it up just a little bit and just try to make sure that it cut through the mix and it wasn't too woolly. And I didn't do much. I did the same type of thing for the snare. I'll briefly show you that. You can hear it just has like a little bit more crack, not too much. Same kind of vibe. I didn't want it to feel like a clicky or, overly aggressive snare because that's not how the original sounded, and I want to keep that same vibe. It's a good vibe, man. Toms, I don't think I did much. I think I just cut a bit because they were really bassy, and then I put a little bit more emphasis on the high mids. That way that when you did the tom fill, it wasn't too like woo woo woo. So let me maybe find a spot. Let me show the tom. I thought they came in around here. Let me pull them up. Oh, they're about to come in right now. Yeah, so I have them really low here. And then I'll turn it off. Yeah, it's kind of hard to actually hear because I have it so low. The overheads, I believe, have a lot in the room as well, so I didn't keep the individual tom track too loud. As you can hear here. We also have it in the room. So when I had all of them around the same with the bass and the kick, it was way too woolly. So you can hear it in the mix if I were to just play the whole thing. You can hear the tom fill, but it's a little more subtle than, you know, like a really bassy, boomy one. So you hear more of like the high mid kind of da 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 to it. Hindsight, maybe I'd add a little more bass and crank it up a little bit. I think there's a few parts where it gets a little bit louder, but I could have just automated that down. So if I did the mix again, I'd probably do that because I do love the way a good tom hit sounds. And let's see, I don't think I have much going on here. The hats, I use that soothe type thing. I put it quite a bit just to try to tame it a bit. So soloed, it sounds a little better without this because it kind of takes too many of the resonant frequencies, but in the mix I thought it sounded a little bit better with it on. So you know, I think it was mainly on when the hats were open where it really was kind of bothering me and I added this. But that'd be another thing I could maybe do if I was remixing it, is automate this to only really come on when the hats were hit open and it was actually a nuisance, because it does come through a little bit better when this is off. It's not taming it too much, so something I'd probably change. But let's see, here looks about the same. This is on the tambourine. Overheads didn't do much, just a little bit of the soften. Room, same exact vibe. The kick and snare, I added some transients to that, so let's see difference. So this one's a lot more noticeable. This is probably where the majority of the transient attack kind of addition came through. You can hear it's a lot more like sharp of a sound. And then I did add a little bit of FET compression here, which I'll show how that sounds. So real boomy without. Kind of cleans it up, tightens it. Cool, and then yeah, that's it. Let's show the bass. I had a lot of fun with the bass. I did the only processing on the bus itself, but I did a little bit of sidechain for the kick, so it ducks dynamically just a little bit when the kick plays. Same with the snare. This is on like the lower body of the snare and then the higher crack of it. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't getting eaten up because the bass is turned up a bit. And then I found this bass fuzz preset in Ableton that I really liked, and I just turned the dry wet down, so I'll show you with and without. I think it gives it a lot more energy. So it just gives it a little more of the fuzz that kind of makes it stand out a little bit better on like smaller speakers especially. I didn't want it to change the tone too much because the recorded tone was, you know, the goal. So I wanted it to be more of a feeling than like a noise that you would hear. But I really enjoyed that. And I don't think I'm using this L2. It's probably just something I put on the bus before I had gain stage to make sure it didn't digitally clip. Guitar, let's go into that a little bit. Everything looks about the same. I can tell that I probably sidechained here for the vocals a little bit using the dynamic EQ. Piano, did a little dip as well around that frequency. It's a little bit of glue compression. Just tickling it looks like. And very subtle, but just like a little bit like a dun, 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 you know, like that's kind of vibe I was going for with it. But it's barely tickling it. In the mix, you can't really hear it. It's more of like a subtle feel that adds up as you do this over and over and over. And then I love adding this for a little bit of saturation. It's the tape kind of saturation, and then I'll do the same type of thing where I just push it a little bit and then I'll back it down so that the level doesn't get louder and trick me to make me think it sounds better. So real subtle, you can just hear a little bit more like background, kind of almost like what a reverb would do and give you a little bit of the glue because it kind of fills in space. It just does that a little bit, but it's not really like adding distortion or overdrive or like kicking it up where you can, you know, obviously tell like I added a new pedal onto it or something. The keys, I did a little bit of side chaining for the Kelly vocals and on the snare. This just makes sure those same kind of low and high frequencies. I didn't want the snare to get eaten up. The keys kind of are tricky because they fit in the same frequency as like some of the snare, the vocals, and the guitar. So you really got to choose who's going to win in that case. And usually I have the vocals winning and then the snare as like the second best. But as you can see, you know, the pattern, I do pretty much the same thing, and it's really easy for me to quickly kind of go through and just do a quick gain stage. Maybe if there's a problem with masking, I'll tackle that. Broad sweeping EQ using my ears. Maybe there's some harsh frequencies I'm going to tame a little bit. I think the clav kind of had some of that. Clip to be tamed in terms of transients. Maybe a little compression on the bus. Let's see how much it's actually used here. Yeah, same. It's really just tickling it. I could probably take it off and you'd never notice. Over time, I think it adds up, but you know, very, very subtle little things here. A little bit here, a little bit there. And then another little bit of tape saturation, about the same settings as I did on the guitars. The vocals, I noticed when I was doing the video the first time that I didn't record it properly. I don't know why I put the main as a side chain on the main vocal bus, like that has the main, like this is the main vocal, the main vocal track, and then I'm on the bus here, so it's a little weird. I think it might have just been me moving too quick. I should have just put this on the main track, but whatever. And excuse me with that notification noise. It's probably awful. Try to take that out in post. And then let's see, nothing else crazy. Put a little bit of saturation, the sweeping EQ with bull tag, gain stage, and let me glance through some of the tracks, see if anything really worth sharing before I get to like the automation part of things. I think the main vocal chain might be interesting. I put a little bit of cuts here and there to just kind of get rid of some like harsher frequencies. I think this one is kind of in like that de-essing kind of vibe. Like I put some dynamic EQ. It just got rid of a little bit of the harshness on some of the sibilances. Let me see if I can find some. Yeah, so very subtle. It just there's a few times where, you know, it's like and like the taming of that a little bit kind of goes down so it doesn't sound as harsh, because this mix is a little bit brighter, so I really had to be careful with it not being too bright. I think I doubled up on the soften, so I did a little bit more of that resonant frequency suppression, so you can see it's doing more work. So to my ears, it sounds a little bit more clear when it was enabled. So I actually ended up stacking it. So I'm using this one quite a bit. This one's in the guitar range, so this is probably nasal. I'd say that's like maybe 500, maybe like 300 up to 4. And then this one is on the vocals. So it's kind of covering a wide area of the frequency range and taming a lot of the different resonant peaks. So that's why I had two. One's using the guitar setting, which is a little bit lower, and then the vocals, this is more in like the 4K to maybe 10K. Some Pultec, nothing new. I did add a Fairchild, and one thing, I wanted to fatten the vocals a little bit, and I really liked the way it sounded in the vocal bus when I had the mix up really high, but then whenever it was kind of on the main track with everything, it just sounded a little bit too bright. So I'll kind of show you why I backed it down to almost like maybe 5% or so. Might be a little more noticeable solo. Couldn't get sweeter from the hive. The wild, wild, twisted waves. Put my money. So I think I ended up around here, maybe. Good love, I need a good love, I need a good love. So it was a little too compressed sounding when I had the mix up too much. Probably because I'm like really pushing it here with the gain and the threshold. But, you know, especially on the breaths, I could automate this, but I really didn't want to do too much crazy stuff with it. You know, when it's like the good love, good, like when it's compressed too much like that, you can really hear that kind of picking up, and you hear the breath too much, and it's very distracting. So I gave it has a little bit more fatness, but it's not overkill, so I'll toggle on and off. Every day, you know I need me a good love, I need a good love, I need a good. To me, it's just a little bit thicker and a little bit more bright, so I like the way that sounds. I put the LA2A here. This is doing a lot of the work with the vocals. Love, I need a good love every day. You know I need me a good love, I need a good love, I need a good. So when it's soloed, it sounds a little bit too compressed, you know, like you can hear the breaths the way that I was talking about with the Fairchild, but in the mix, it brings it more forward. To me now, it's kind of just in the background. See what else I got going on. Do I have two LA2As? Yeah, so I actually have two LA2As. So this one's one too. And a little bit of tape saturation, again, very subtle. Good love, I need a good love, I need a good. This gives it a little bit more sizzle, a little more air to me. And then I did realize when I was recording the first time that this gate's not really set to be used. I think I had put it after doing a little bit of compression. It had a little too much noise, but in hindsight, I think it makes way more sense to put the gate earlier, so when the noise is less, you gate it out, and then by the time it gets to the compressor, that noise isn't getting raised. At this point, it's not even really in the threshold, so it's not being used, so ignore that. And this is something that's kind of cool that I'll demonstrate. I made this during this track because I really wanted to automate the volume quite a bit, but I wanted to like feel the tactile knobs and turn it up and down. But I didn't want it to go like 8 dB up. So what I did was I made these, it's basically just stacking a bunch of utilities, but I made sure that I mapped it in a way here that the minimum is only like 1 dB or the max is 1 dB. And I have different ones, so 1, 2, 3, and 5. But, you know, if I really want to make a drastic change, I can go at the most up by 5 or at the most down by 5. But it won't be like up to 12 or something crazy where it's like unusable. So it's really good to automate. You can see I have some automation here that I can demonstrate. So I'm like really cranking it up, but at the end of the day, it's only going up 2. So it's nice. There's a little bit more, like this one I did a little more. I'll show you more with the backup vocals where I did a little more of the automation. You can see more interesting lanes, but this was really helpful for me to really kind of feel the music. So it's like, good love, you know, without having to be like gentle and careful with the knobs. So I saw this Mix with the Masters with Jack Antonov, and he really talked about trying to use the mixing board and tools like an instrument, where you're really kind of manipulating them in real time and automating that, you know, with your hands and feeling it rather than just clicking all the time. And it's been a lot of fun trying that out more, and this is a good way to do that without being too careless with like the levels being out of control. So, and let's see a few more things. I'll show you a little more automation. I think the keys have quite a bit. Yeah, here we go. So it looks gnarly, right? It's like up and down and blah blah blah. But I only have it going at the most 0. So I made a similar tool, but this one only goes down. This one only goes down by up to 1 or down by up to 2 and so forth. So it's really nice because at the max of here, I'm only going down 2. So I can really kind of ride it like, but it's only making it quieter by 2 just to give it a little more space. So it's even kind of hard to hear like that, but like let me just play it and try to listen. Like you can hear when the good love is playing or when the vocals are playing, you don't really hear the keyboard like interfering, but then at the end you do hear the down like at the end of it. So let me play the chorus to everything. So before I did any of that, it was constantly playing. If I were to open up the piano track, it's going, you know, like this is the chorus, it's fat. It's being played the whole time. So that was really distracting in my opinion with the vocals. So I just did that little 2 dB dip whenever the vocals came through to make sure they really punched. They're in the same frequency range, so I think it was really important. Let's see, and yeah, I'll end everything. I'm just gonna briefly show you, nothing fancy, but I have a plate reverb on the send. I used a cut on the bass and treble, so it's really just a bit of a mid-range reverb, and then I cut all the reverb time, so it felt kind of like you're in a small room and not like a big large one. And then I have the wet solo on, so I can use it in the return track, and it's, you know, maximum. So if I were to just like solo that return, so you can hear I have a little bit of the main vocal, but it's mostly the background vocals. And I did that because I feel like when you want something to sit further back in the mix, like further from the listener, if you add a little bit of reverb, it kind of feels that way. Like the singer's right in front of you, and then the background singers are further away. So I thought it sounded really nice. The slapback, this made a big difference on the main vocal especially, so I'll show you like with and without. So let's just play the main vocal, and then I'm gonna turn all of the effects here off, but let me just keep the slap back on.
Good love, I need a good love, I need a good love in every way.
So it really kind of makes it feel fatter and more live and energetic to me. And then this one is a delay trail. So I'm using the Galaxy Tape Echo here, and I have it set to a little bit of a slower rate. It's not crazy slow, but for the Tape Echo, I think it's the slowest it can do. And this is basically automated in a way that it's not interfering with the vocal, but you can hear it whenever the vocal stops. So I thought this was really handy. So like, let me show here in the chorus. You'll hear that it's not on, but whenever it's like every way, so it fills up that space, but it's not doing the echo while you're singing. So it's not like and a good and a good and a good, like while you're still doing the verse, it's quiet and you get all that clarity and punch from the actual vocal, but that space fill is really nice. So let me show you how that sounds.
Need a good love in every way.
So in the mix, you don't hear it overkill like it's distracting, but it does sound fatter. Especially, you know, right now I have the slap back and the verb off, but let me put them on. So you can hear very slightly, way. I did a little bit of that, I think, with some of the other backups and the oohs and the ahs. There's a little bit less automation now. I just put, you know, A is the reverb, B is the slapback, and then C is the tail. So you can tell with the backups and the oohs, I just kind of have them a little bit more washed out. So they're still clear. They're still really audible, and part of the original mix, I could tell that the background vocals were very loud compared to what I would have expected. Okay, I can demonstrate that really quick. Go to, I'm gonna toggle their mix on and maybe go like here or something. Like the background vocals are almost louder than the main vocal, and it's nice because they're not at the same time as the main vocal, but you can hear they're very loud and noticeable. So I didn't want to lose that either, but I didn't want it to be too distracting. So, you know, I can tell in the mix panning kind of was used, but I wanted to make sure it sounded good on mono too. So I used the reverb to kind of push it back but still keep it audible, and then the slapback kind of makes it a little bit more clear so it's not just washed out. And that's the gist of everything. A few other little pro tips that I find really helpful is, you know, in Ableton you can label areas of the track, so this makes it really easy for me to remember where I'm at, and you can click on them and start right there. And you know, grouping your tracks in this way, to me, it makes it really easy to find everything. And, you know, regardless of whatever colors or names you choose, I think just being consistent makes it where you don't have to think about all that kind of stuff, so you can focus on mixing. And then I think the very last thing I'll end on is something that I did that was kind of new. I got mixed reviews on, but I thought it was kind of interesting, is I made an A-B track. So one thing I wanted to do was kind of like how earlier I was toggling between the A and B while it was playing. I wanted to do that for myself so I could share it with people and just kind of not show visually, hey, this is one version and this is another version. Just kind of say, like, see their face, right? If you're playing it and it's like, oh, I don't like the way that sounds or something. It's really obvious which one is which to you, the mixer, and you get like a unbiased kind of review. But I noticed when I was trying to export with automation that did the A and B on and off, it didn't keep that. It just had like my actual mix. So what I did was I made a track here, and I had the main channel feeding into it. So I'm basically using it like a tape recorder. And then as I was recording it, I was just toggling the A and B on. So basically doing automation, but it's putting it live, like this is the final master, mix being toggled between the original and mine. And then I just exported this single track. So I got mixed reviews. A lot of people wished that it was, a single one and another single one you can compare. But I think in reality, that's just kind of what we're all used to. And it was kind of nice to be able to visually see people showing it to them the first time. You can tell whenever it switched, kind of, they were like, I wonder what that, like, I don't know if I like that. Or, ooh, that sounds better. What difference is that? Is that the other one? So something I might start doing or tweak a little bit. I thought was kind of interesting. And that's it. So yeah, I'm going to submit this. And if you have any questions, let me know. And I'll try to do more of these as I have more songs that I mix and share anything I learn. So thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Cheers.